Are you ready? Stand by.
Hey everybody, I'm Dave Hartman and welcome to The Three Gun Show. This is episode 219 with Greg Jordan, and holy cow, this is a good one. Greg really brings the goods in this episode, and we discuss why he's always shooting on a stage, what makes him a slow stage walker, and why he's abandoned dry fire. This podcast is brought to you by IWI. I've been running through photos from the Red October Kalashnikov Championships, and man, the response that I get when I post pictures of my raced out Galil Ace has been pretty cool. There are a lot of rabid AK and Galil owners out there, so hopefully we can lure some of them into competitive shooting. You know, maybe 3-gun, maybe a carbine match, who knows. The Galil is really a dream to shoot, and some of the negative Nancy's online say that if I'm going to be shooting a raced out Galil in an AK match, I should be shooting an AR-15. Well, whatever, man. I'm going to keep enjoying IWI's Galil that they've actually been upgrading and improving over the last 40 years into the current version, the Ace. And I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to enjoy every minute of it, just like I shoot my raced out AR-15s when I shoot 3-gun. So check out iwi.us to get your own, see what we're talking about, and know the difference for yourself. This podcast is brought to you by Breda USA, Italian shotguns that are the best in the world. And this is a shotgun tech tip from Team Breda. Hey, this is Dave Hartman from the 3-Gun Show, and I've got Josh Tanner here with Team Breda, and we've got a shotgun tech tip for you. Josh, what do you got?
All right, today we're going to talk about point of aim, point of impact change on a shotgun when you run a lot of rounds down through the gun. So on a long shotgun stage where you've shot a lot of birdshot, the barrel will heat at a different rate than the ribs do, which can start to affect the point of aim, point of impact versus a cold gun. Now, I found that to be much less of an issue with these Breda shotguns, I think due to their barrel manufacturing process, but it's still important to go out and warm your shotgun up really, really hot, shoot a lot of rounds through it, and check and see what that point of aim, point of impact is different with a warm gun versus a cold gun.
All right, thanks, Josh. That's your shotgun tech tip from Breda Shotguns. Check out Breda's B12i 3-gun ready inertia-driven shotgun at bredausa.com. That's BREDA. Thank you for joining me here on the 3-Gun Show, the world's largest 3-gun podcast. This show is purpose-built for you to learn about practical shooting while you're on your commute, at the gym, at work, ignoring your family, whatever you do when you have your earbuds in. Every single Wednesday, there is a new episode waiting for you to download, listen to, and learn. So if you're into this kind of content, hit that subscribe button. Make sure to tell a friend. Leave a review if you can. All that good stuff. And enjoy every single episode that comes out every single week. Now, on to this week's show. I'm really pumped to have Greg Jordan back on the podcast. Greg was kind enough to be the very first guest on the 3-Gun Show back in episode 1, which is 217 episodes ago or so. And that was April of 2015, which is kind of crazy to think about all the stuff that's happened between then and now. If you haven't listened to that one yet, I put the link in the show notes at 3gunshow.com, and it's episode 1, so it's pretty easy to find. I encourage you to go back and listen to that first interview after you listen to this one. You'll find a lot of parallels in the talks and the dedication and consistency that Greg is known for. But before you do that, today you're going to hear Greg talk about some deep details of his training and his practice. Greg says, you're not going to rise to the occasion if you don't put in the work before a match, which is a twist on a phrase that he uses when he trains law enforcement and military. Boy, is he right, but not only is he right, he tells you why he's right. So find out what work he puts in and how he does it in this interview with Greg Jordan. Greg, welcome back to the 3-Gun Show.
Dave, thanks for having me, man. It's been a while, but congrats on all the success on the show, what you're doing for the sport.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. So it has been a long time. You were the very first interview I did for the 3-Gun Show.
I remember it, man. I remember it very well.
Could you tell when you were when you're like, this guy's so new?
Well, you know, that's, I've done a few interviews over the years, and, like I said, you had a lot of questions, a lot of good questions. We talked for a while, and then I listened to some other podcasts later, and it really, you really come a long way. You've done a lot for the sport as far as informing shooters as well as getting new shooters into it. So,
dude, I appreciate that.
Congrats.
Thanks, man. Yeah, so I listened to our interview on the way up here, the one that we did initially, as sort of like a refresher, like what have we already talked about? What would I like to dig in first? Because like you said, I did have a lot of questions, but I had these are the questions I'm going to ask, and I didn't really explore rabbit trails like I do now, So I was listening to it, and I was thinking oh shit, I can't believe anyone stuck with this. it's like watching your first film of you shooting 3-gun, It's like, man, that felt so fast in my head, and then 3 years later you're looking at it and you're dropping quad loads.
Didn't look so fast.
It didn't feel fast at all.
So
yeah, so thanks for sticking in with that.
Absolutely,
that was great. And one of the things that we talked about from the initial episode, and I completely spaced on this, but was bracketing targets in a mill reticle. And I can't tell you how many people have come up to me and I heard on the show, bracketing targets and blah blah blah, and then talking about long range and everything. And after so many times of hearing it over the years, I'm like, oh shoot, that was the very first episode. It was gold from the beginning. So
absolutely,
you helped a lot of people with their long range game, and just those little bits of talking about how you use your own reticle and your own gear.
Yep, still using the same reticle. And actually, it's funny. Rick and I were talking about coming in this morning with the loophole in the Horse 27. All these targets out here, when we ranged them, we were talking about bracketing. And yesterday, it was so windy out here, we had to bracket and then also hold wind on top of that. So having those steady lines in there, I think we were holding 1.5 mil on the 500-yard target, which is
is that right?
The most I've ever held in a 3-gun match.
Dang,
that's a lot of wind.
So I shot that this morning, and it was a dead hold for me.
Don't tell me that. Yeah, that was a lot of work finding that wind yesterday. We came up with a bracket beforehand. I was figuring 12 to 15 mile an hour. And then it wasn't quite full value, so we were going back and forth with the math when I was the first shooter on stage. And you couldn't see impact, so I told him, I said, I'm going to start here, and then we'll start working from there, and it took me a couple rounds to find on the 400-yard, and then we carried that to the next one, and then by 500, I added just a little bit more. So, but it took a couple shots to find it. So I came out this morning and saw the flag was just hanging, and I was like, man.
Yeah. It was pretty rough. We were sitting over there, and we're looking at, all the targets out there, and, yesterday when we got here, the wind was really whipping. It was when you guys were probably out on the stages shooting, and we're seeing the grass flow, because we're out here on the prairie in Wyoming, right? And this morning when I got up there, the grass is just still, not even moving. And I was like, oh, my God, this is so great.
Let me shoot now.
I finally won the lottery over long-range stages.
Yeah.
But that bracketing wind concept that you talk about, really, as far as, bracketing mills, that's something I've been using for a long time, and it's basically because of what we were talking about on the podcast. But bracketing wind was something that I was reminded of when I was listening to it on the way up here, and I definitely used that on stage 1 out there, which was another long range stage, not quite as far, but it was 440 or something like that.
Yep.
And I was asking everyone, where are you holding when they're coming off, and so I'm taking the least hold and the max hold of this somewhere in the middle here, and ended up doing pretty good. So it's kind of amazing how going back and listening to it with fresh ears and having more experience in the game, you're like, oh, there's way more there's way more depth here than I thought there was.
That's how 3-gun is. There's a lot of stuff you can be told that you kind of gloss over if you're not at that point in your career.
Yeah,
because there's so much to learn. I mean, I learn stuff every time I come out to a match. So when you start, like you said, when you start to listen to that stuff later, or you hear it again later on in a stage or something like that from somebody, you're like, now you can process it because your skill level is getting further and further along. Because if you go out there on a stage and you try and think of all the tips and all the advice you've been given over the years, and you try and think of all that at once, you really remember none of it. You know what I mean? But once you start to build that skill set, then you can start to add in the little details, and it really furthers your game.
Yeah, and it becomes a part of what you do, and you may not even be able to explain it at some point. It's just like, this is what I'm doing now.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
It reminds me of the first time I read Practical Shooting Beyond Fundamentals. Most of that stuff went way over my head.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's an interesting book. It was kind of weird at first, and then it got into technical things that I needed to know. But going back and listening to it on a trip last year with fresh ears, it was like, mind blowing. It's like, oh my God, like I had no context to understand this when the first time I listened to it.
You see it, you understand it now, you know what I mean? And then you can start to apply it, and then you can start to explain it to other people. I'm looking at this target, and he talks about like the 5 different types of targets, the vision and all that stuff. Now you can look at that and be like, well, that's a 50-yard target with a pistol. I need to have like the most defined vision, that type 5 vision, and look at that target, look at the sights and all that. And you can explain that to people better now. But yeah, when you first read it, I did the same thing. When I first picked up USPSA, I said, this is a must read. I have to read it. And I got done. I was like, wow, where do you start? So, but absolutely.
Yeah. And I wonder if it's like, for me, a lot of it had to be like a lot of it maturity as a person as well, because the concepts in that book are so much higher than I was at 10 years ago when I started shooting. So it's it reminds me the saying like a man can never cross the same river twice because he's never the same man and it's never the same river. It's always like you're coming at it from different perspectives, and that's what's cool about 3-gun and practical shooting in general. Is there's never a perfect stage. There's always something to learn. There's always something to chase. So
absolutely, I can't think of any stage that I've ever come off of. I've come off of stages thinking that that's the best I can run it right now, but I've never come off of one saying that I couldn't improve somewhere.
Yeah,
it may have been the best performance I could put up at the time, but there's always someone I watch a video later and say, yep, that could have been better. That could have been smoother. That could have been quicker, or I could have changed my plan and done this. So, yeah, it's a constant learning game.
So then do you take those videos, those game films, and break them down and incorporate, what you learn from that in your practice?
Yeah. Yep. The biggest thing I take from it is the plans. If I can see some other guys run their plans and kind of compare them. And then the other part of that is if I feel or see that I done something or didn't do something, if my shotgun movement needs to be a little bit cleaner, that's what I'll pull out and work in practice. If my pistol wasn't as clean as I need it to be, that's what I'll pull out and focus on until I feel like I'm there in practice and then move on. I don't waste as much time on the things that I'm doing well at that point. I'll brush over them in practice, but I really want to concentrate on what I feel. And a lot of times I've run enough stages over the years that I can feel when I come off a stage, I can be like, yep, the shotgun is where I lost it there. I don't have to look at a video because I know it just didn't feel right. And this match in particular, I haven't been practicing as much lately just because of work. It's been taking a lot of time from me. And I'm running at the pace I should be running, but I'm not hitting all the targets I should be. Yeah. So I know where I need to work on. And I can feel the movement and the speed. I was talking to my buddy Rick after a couple of these stages, and I said, that's the speed I need to move. I'm just not getting the hits I need to get.
Right.
You know what I mean? So they need to mesh up, and the only way to do it is practice. I mean, that's the only way to find that speed and then make sure the discipline and the sight pictures and all that stuff are all matching up.
So when you run a stage and you, like in your head, you're like, okay, it was the shotgun right there that was holding me back, right? You don't have to look at that third-person view. Do you then go back and check it to see, like, am I correct on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can look at it and see, and a lot of times, too, the good thing about Facebook, all right, social media, is everybody puts their runs on there, so you can kind of see and break down, like, okay, so, Dan ran this stage and 5 seconds faster, and you watch his plan. Well, was his plan the same? If it was, okay, we were seeing the same thing on the plan. What did his shotgun look like? Keith, what did Keith's shotgun look like? Where were these guys running? Where did they pick up time on me? And that's a huge thing, and it's an ever chasing battle. I mean, you're never gonna get away from that. You know what I mean? Because there's always guys out there. There's new guys. You look at a stage, you might not even recognize the name. You're like, who's this guy? And then you watch it on, you find it somewhere, and then you watch it. You're like, wow, I didn't even think of that. You know what I mean? So this sport, I mean, some of these stages out here this weekend, there's not as many options as some of the events we've shot in the past, but just seeing the different plans guys are running on a few of these stages, it's interesting to see how when the dust all settles, most of the plans are pretty close as long as they're executed properly. But there's a lot of cool ideas.
Yeah, this is a super pistol-heavy match for me. Did you find that as well?
Yes. I hope I brought enough pistol.
I had to trade some slugs for a pistol earlier. I got really lucky. For some reason, I brought a case of slugs instead of the amount of slugs I need to, and there was a guy that needed slugs. I'm like, hey, you got any extra pistol, man?
I hope I have enough pistol. I think I bought 300, but I think I'm going to use most of them. And when we got done looking at stages on Friday, Rick and I were talking. I said, wow, I hope we brought enough pistol, because I said, A lot of this stuff, while you could shoot it with shotgun,
Yeah.
it didn't make sense because maybe it added an extra transition, or you had to go out of your way, or there would have been a lot more loading versus just shooting with a pistol. And the big thing about that is most matches where there's an option, the targets are a little bit smaller.
Right.
So it kind of leans you. You're like, man, you could go both ways. Here, the targets are a little bit bigger, and it almost forces you to go pistol.
Yeah, when you're talking like an 8-inch knockdown steel, I mean, that's no question when you can just ditch your shotgun and go to your pistol, and now you've got 23 tries instead of stuffing, a max of 13 in your gun.
Yep, and the movements, for me, the movement's the biggest thing. So, an 8-inch target, I feel like I can move with both guns. You put a 4x10 out there, depending on the distance, and now it's like, do I really feel like I can move with pistol? Or that's pretty much still a good target for shotgun, so that may sway your decision. But here, most of the targets are like 8, 10-inch targets, so you can
They're
definitely
all round square or hex. There's none of the skinny ones like you were talking about.
Yep.
Yeah, no 4x10s, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at those.
That's everybody's nemesis.
Yeah, I know. Like, man, I knocked those over so easy in practice.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
so.
When you're talking about moving on stages, and I think this kind of from the people that I talked to. So I wasn't around for 3-Gun before 3-Gun Nation, but the 3-Gun Nation Pro Series that was done, Tulsa, and I think they did it in Florida for a while. It got to the point where, like, if you stop moving to take a target, like, you're down 5 spots.
Yeah.
Right? So like you had to constantly keep moving.
With exception, there were a couple guys that could get away with that. Keith and Shane Coley. Those guys, they were so explosive in their movement, and their shooting, their splits and transitions were so good that they could run to a place and stop and then run to a next place, and they could keep up. I learned pretty quick that I couldn't keep up like that, and I had to force my game to move more. And that's really what started me moving, because I would do the same thing. I would compare video, and I wasn't shooting as fast as – and Taryn was another one. Taryn could do it as well. Wasn't shooting as fast as those guys, and I wasn't moving as fast as, Dan and some of the other guys. So it was like, well, what if I do the middle? What if I find a way I can move? And I know my movement's not as explosive as some of these newer guys out here. You look at some of the athletes that are coming out here from different sports.
Oh, yeah.
They really have explosive movement. For me, it's more about being smooth. It's more about starting the stage and not stopping till the end, and being smooth on the transitions and the movement, and kind of blending both. You know what I mean? Maybe my splits and transitions aren't as fast as some of the stand and shoot guys, and maybe my movement's not as fast as some of the movement guys, but if I can blend it in the middle for me. Because when I look at videos sometimes, I'm like, that doesn't look that fast. And a lot of people will tell you that if you watch, like, the one I always tell people is Max Michel. You watch Max shoot a stage, and you get done, you're like, that didn't look that fast. And you look at the time, and you're like, holy cow, because he's so smooth and effortless throughout the stage.
He looks super relaxed while he's shooting, too.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And there's really no explosive movement. I mean, it depends on the stage, but for the most part, like a long field course, you just watch him float through the stage. And then, like you said, very relaxed, very effortless, move through, and you get done, you look at the time, you're like, holy cow. You know? So that's kind of where my goal is just to be smooth and flow through a stage.
Right. Well, and then contrasting with someone like JJ Rakaza, who definitely looks like he's moving out there.
Yep.
He's very athletic. He's got that low squat. He stands for everything he does, explosive movements into areas. And, he looks like he's getting after it.
Yes,
if
absolutely.
you're looking at the video.
Great athlete,
Yeah.
and that style works for him. Not everybody can replicate that because, we're not all that kind of athlete.
Right.
So I think that's the important thing as a shooter. There are different ways to skin a cat here as far as how we can work this problem. You may not be able to move like JJ, and you may be, you're not be able to post up and shoot like somebody like Keith or Taryn, but you can find that middle ground that works for you, and it can still work. The main thing out of it is once you find what works for you is then executing that time and time again. That consistency then falls into play, not trying to play somebody else's game. Because that's a big thing out here. When you watch somebody shoot a stage, you're like, wow, that guy just posted up there and shot. I should do the same thing. You know what I mean? If that's not your game, you have to stick with it. Good example of that was last night. If you were commentating on the shoot-off we had last night. A lot of different, in such a small stage, a lot of different options. If you saw guys pick up the PCC, and some guys would sprint to the end and shoot.
Yep,
other
post
guys,
up and shoot.
Yeah, other guys would go halfway and start shooting on the move.
Yep.
And that's just all the game. You're watching guys shoot. You're like, well, was that faster? Well, some guy like Josh Frolick, great athlete. I mean, the guy he sprints down there really aggressive and post up and shoot. That's his game.
Yep.
He does it very well. And then some other guys, they changed it up, and the times were still pretty equal. So
yeah, and it's a very IPSC style of shooting too, right? And Josh has just come off of shooting the Shotgun World Shoots, and there's not a lot of from all the film that I saw, there's not a lot of shooting on the move in IPSC. It's a lot of move, post, shoot a bunch of stuff, move, post, shoot a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I think some of that has to do with the target arrays they set out.
Yeah,
I've never
very
shot
technical targets.
Yeah, I've never shot the World Shoot as far as like the shotgun stuff, but I know that they have a lot of tight nose shoots, a lot of small targets, and with shotgun you can't afford extra shots because it just causes you to load more, right? So, it may be beneficial to stop and shoot and aim more versus sometimes shoot on the move. You have to admit that you're going to miss some targets along the way, but your movement is gaining ground. So if I have to throw an extra shot on there, it's not the end of the world because I'm still gaining ground in the process. Whereas if I post up and shoot, you don't want to have those extra shots because then you're just staying in that position longer.
Yeah, exactly. It's taking you more time.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a tough balance between the moving and the posting when you haven't quite figured it out. You know, like as a shooter on their journey, a lot of times. Some match I'll shoot on the move, no big problem. Other matches like it's just not working this time out, and I'm sure that has to do with like the amount of practice I've had in between and stuff like that. But the like you said, when you watch someone out there, like I'll think like, okay, well I hit these on the move and I'll come into it, but then I'll watch someone just sprint and post, and it's almost like in my head it gives me permission to do it. Well, that guy did it; it must be okay, that kind of thing.
And that's the hard part with this sport. There is no black and white. It's all gray area, and I think a lot of new shooters have a hard time with that because they come in and they watch somebody shoot a stage and you say, and they come up and ask you a question, how are you going to shoot this stage? Are you going to move on these? Are you going to post? And then, this stage I'm going to move. And the next stage we go over there and I'm going to post. And, well, you moved on the last stage. It's not going to work out on this stage because of this, this, and this. You know what I mean? And that's a hard thing to understand because there's no black and white. Like every single time I see this, I'm going to post, or I'm going to move. And that's just part of learning the game, what you can do as a shooter, which equates to what you've done in practice. So,
do you have any like rules of thumb for yourself that you use? Like this is a shoot on the move type of thing. This is going to be a post.
I shoot on the move as much as I can.
Okay.
I always want to, especially the stages where they have a lot of ground to cover, where we start, where we have to finish. I have to get to that end to finish. I'm going to try and shoot on the move as much as I can and maximize shooting time. Sometimes it looks really good if I sprint a long distance, but during that sprint, if I'm not shooting, sometimes it kind of negates all the other movements. So however I can start shooting the quickest and keep shooting the whole time. You know what I mean? And like I said, every stage is a little bit different how it's set up. There are times where you have to post. They're small targets or there's such a big array that my movement is going to be so slow through that array. You're better off just to get there and shoot it and get out of there. So,
right.
I mean, you have to work both in practice, but 9 times out of 10 on a normal array with 4 or 5 targets that are at a reasonable distance, reasonable size, you're always going to be better. Even if you throw extra shots, you're always going to be better to move. And if you show new shooters that sometimes, I've done classes where you'll set an array out and you'll be like, hey, guys, how do you feel about shooting on the move? Well, I would never shoot those on the move. Okay, well, let's try it. Post up and shoot them, and then we'll shoot it on the move. And then they get done, and they may have thrown an extra shot or two, but at the end they're like, wow, I covered all this ground. I threw 2 extra shots, and my time is still the same. So if your time's the same, you still have to cover that ground when you post. You know what I mean? So it's really eye-opening for them, and it gives them another option when they go to a stage.
Right. So that makes sense for pistol, right? Because throwing 2 extra shots is not necessarily a huge deal because you've got 21 to 22 to deal with, right, in your magazine. Does that change when you go to shotgun?
Depends on the loading.
Okay.
So if you feel comfortable loading, shotgun, you're not – I shouldn't say you're not, but most of the time guys won't throw as many extra shots as long as their movement technique is all correct. So if I throw an extra shot and there's time to load, as long as it's not something crazy. Some of these stages where you're doing, 52 rounds of shotgun. I mean, if you're going to Rocky next week, you're going to see a stage with 50-some rounds of shotgun. If you start missing 1 or 2 rounds every array, you're going to run out of shells. You know what I mean? So if it's something where, you have 16, 18, targets you have to deal with and you can throw an extra 1 or 2 in there, it's not going to be the end of the world. And your time's usually going to be better with the movement. Like I said, there's no black and white, and that's what's cool about the sport because you're not channeled into one way all the time, and that's part of the challenge and the intrigue for me is figuring out a plan that's going to be good because there are a lot of different options out there, and you have to pick what works for you, and then you have to execute it then. So
I think a lot of times, we only show the videos of us making noise and stuff on the Instagram and the Facebooks, and you don't get to see obviously the holes in the targets, but you also don't get to see the walkthrough, the planning or anything. And I think that's lost on a lot of new people about how this sport really is about solving a problem in the most efficient way possible, and each stage is its own puzzle to come up with the proper solution.
Yep.
So the a lot of times when we have people to walk with and bounce ideas off of, that helps out. So if you're walking solo and you don't have that perspective, how do you approach a stage and try to see everything out there, all the options that are available, rather than just getting sucked into the path that's on the ground?
For me, I'm a slow stage walker. A lot of guys will dive right into it, and they kind of just like they've already, I won't say made their mind up. For the most part, they have a way they shoot, and they just dive into it, and they're like, that's my plan, I'm out of here. I'm a slow stage walker. First off, find all the targets. Make sure you have all the targets. And then as I start to move through, just find a way that flows. Like I said, I don't like to have to stop and start and stop and start. And when a stage feels choppy to me, I always look for a better plan. If I feel like I can be smoother in a way with the movement or the transitions. But, yeah, just figuring out, okay, this is going to get me started shooting the fastest. This is going to allow me to flow through. And then as I'm moving through that stage, what can I trim off of here? How can I stay shooting? If I could have options. Options are the biggest thing. Should I shoot this with pistol or shotgun? And then the only thing you have to work off of is your practice times. I know in practice I can shoot this array faster with shotgun, and it's going to negate the transition to a pistol later, But, yeah, solo, I take a lot of time on a stage. Some stages are pretty gimme when it's like everybody has to shoot it the same way. You look at the target array, and you're like, there's no options, and this is pistol, this is shotgun, this is rifle, and this is the only way you can shoot it. And you walk off the stage, and you're done.
Right.
But the ones with options, I've spent up to an hour. The old Pro Series, it was like 5 stages, and we would spend an hour to an hour and a half at some of the technical stages just making sure we had all the targets, and then running like 18 different plans. And then sometimes we'll even put it on a stopwatch and air gun it. And you have to be legit with your air gunning. Some guys,
I'm really fast air gunning.
Yeah, everybody's fast, and you never miss, right? So some guys get a little carried away with that. So you have to shoot it at a reasonable speed when you're air gunning. But we would do that, like, all right, we've narrowed it down to 2 different plans. Let's do this one and this one. And we run it, and we say, like, okay, that one's a second faster here. As long as we execute it properly, we're good. So, but, yeah, there's a lot to be learned in your stage plans. And that's a huge part of the sport, just planning. Not the practice part, just planning a stage.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure. And that is something difficult to practice.
Yes.
Planning a stage.
Yes.
You almost have to have like a bro set a stage up, and then you just come walk it blind, because if you put one target down, then it makes it I don't know, not really the same experience as you get coming to a match. That's where like the club matches come into
club
play
matches.
and shine.
If you have the availability of having a stage set up, I'll do this a lot, because during the year I don't practice unless I have a major issue that comes up during the year. I practice stages more than I practice the actual like drills and skills. That's like a early season practice to get tuned back up, and then throughout the year I practice the stages, and I'll set a stage up that I can run 20 different ways, and then I'll look at the problem and I'll say, well, this is how I would shoot in a match, and I'll shoot that. And then I'll run it a couple times on a par to make sure I'm consistent. And then I'll come back and I'll say, all right, how can I trim the fat off this? What can I do to make this faster? And then I'll start exploring options. Like, okay, well, how about I shoot this all pistol? And then see how the times stack up. But if you can have a stage, you can run multiple different ways. You can do a lot of different things with it. You don't have to have a lot of time changing setup and stuff like that. But that's how you learn a lot with your movement and your gun transitions and all that stuff, is running a stage and then experiment, because there's no consequence there. So if you totally bomb it, it's like, well, that's not even going to be an option now,
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's also good to see that you're consistent, because a lot of times you can run a short drill in practice, something, a 6-round drill or something like that, and you can stay pretty consistent because there's not much you can mess up. When you start running a 30-round stage and run it 3 or 4 different times, that's where the consistency comes in. Can I stay within a second or two of each run? At that 90% pace.
Right. Well, and with a 6-round array, too, you're going to shoot that like 17 times.
Yeah.
And by that 17th, that's what you're going to go away in your head of your ability, not that first cold run or not the 5th one,
Yep.
So the the running stage is completely counter to what most people usually say on the podcast. They're like, I stick to the fundamentals, I stick to the basics. That's running a 30-round stage multiple times in a day is pretty good practice session for a lot of people.
Yeah, and like I said, everybody's different because I ran into that when I was shooting USPSA a lot. I've been to some classes, and a lot of the instructors really focused on drills and skills. You have to do this. And I think a lot of that may have been because of the sport, maybe the classifier side of things. Guys always want to bump up their classification.
Well, the classifier doesn't have any sort of stage planning or field courses involved at all, so it's all gun manipulation.
Yeah, and then when I would go to the major matches, I would see that my performance wasn't where my class was, you know, and I'm like, what am I missing here? And it was the stage side of things. So I think I went to a class years ago with Bob Vogel and talking with Bob a lot, and I said, what do you do for practice? He said, I run stages. So that's totally different than what everybody else does. And then I started to incorporate that more and more, and that works for me. If I'm running a stage and I see that, my offhand rifle isn't working well, then I stop and go over here and work offhand rifle for a while and come back and put it into the stage.
Okay.
But for me, it's more about the flow because it never fails, especially like early season, this year's Superstition. I was pretty spun up on my drills and skills when I left. My stage flow was horrible. When I was running a stage, and I could just feel like this is not going how it should be. It's not smooth. It feels choppy. And the plans were good. It was just I wasn't executing them properly because I hadn't run enough stages early in the season. I got my guns out, blew the dust off, and I started working. And I worked the drills and skills, and I was pretty spun up on that. But the flow of the stage wasn't there. So that's when I was like, all right, it's time to get away from that and work to a stage plan now.
Okay.
Which, it seems like it helps me out.
Right. So the drills and skills portion of it, are you talking live fire? Are you talking dry fire?
Live fire mostly.
Okay.
I'll be honest, Dave, I don't have enough time anymore to do the dry fire. I wish I could. Earlier on, I did a lot of dry fire in between. And I won't say I'd never dry fire anymore. If the weather's bad or something like that, I will get the guns out and just manipulate them a little bit. But for the most part, it's live fire. I mean, I just don't have the time dedicated anymore between all the different things going on to get focused dry fire time and then live fire. So, and most of the things I feel like I have to work anymore are more of like recoil control and stuff like that I can't work in dry fire anyway. So, but
it's hard to watch your sights lift in dry fire.
Yeah. I mean, you can get really good eye speed and some other really good things going on with dry fire. But like I said, the recoil control, imagine that, and then also like the long-range side of the game, getting the holds. It's really hard to shoot targets in dry fire. And there's creative ways you can try and do it, but it never gives you that real feel. So
the I guess then it sounds like you created like a good foundation with dry fire, and then have built on that with live fire.
Yes.
Do you ever revisit dry fire of like there's something I'm not getting here and I don't necessarily need or want to throw rounds down range, or is it seriously just weather dependent?
For the most part, if I am going to dry fire any type of program, it's in the early season. It's just because I haven't touched guns in a while. For me, I have to take a break. I mean, it's just you're running these things all year long, and then I put them away for a while, and it kind of gives you that motivation to come back out. So the dry fire is more so in the off or getting closer to the season, the off season. And a lot of that is just getting yourself accustomed back to, all right, here's my draw, and seeing your sights because, I mean, your eyes get slower over the offseason because you're not transitioning between targets and picking up sights, the focus and all that. So, I mean, you can get your eyes back up to speed. But what you said with the foundation, I think that's a big part that people miss. I like to practice stages a lot. For a new 3-gun shooter to come out and just practice stages, they would be doing themselves a disservice because they haven't built that foundation yet. The only way to build it is through drills and skills. So if you come out there and you run and you're consistent with drills and skills and you can do all those things, then you're applying into a stage because if you don't have that foundation, I don't think you're going to be able to come out and perform on a stage as well as you could.
Right.
And I think it's what guys miss. They always want that shortcut to here.
Yeah.
And there isn't. If you talk to anybody out here, it's years and years of shooting. Whether it's USPSA to 3-gun or wherever the case is, a lot of drills and skills get them to the point where they can come out and run a stage.
Yeah.
As best as they can.
We like that fast solution. Like I can forget to order ammo and have it before I leave for a match if I do it on a Monday.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like the world we live in, and we love to have that shortcut, the instant gratification. You can text your your happy birthdays to your friends and stuff like that. You don't even need to call them and invest the time. So everybody loves that shortcut, and that's a good a good point that you mentioned there is like it does take fundamentals, you know. And I think as super enthusiastic three-gunners, we're always trying to tell people like, hey, look, just bring your gear out and come, you know. And, you know, some club matches I'll see people that can't even send the bolt forward, you know, and it's because they haven't practiced. You know, they're not dumb or anything, and so I'm not putting them down. It's they're just ignorant of the process. And so I think there are certain fundamentals of practical shooting in general once you get beyond like weapons manipulations, how my AR-15 works and how my pistol works, where the safety is and stuff like that. So do you have like a base that you recommend? Because you work with you know, students a lot, right? Do you have like a base that you recommend for dry fire fundamentals or maybe even some basic drills?
I mean, for the three different guns, so one huge thing you can work in dry fire are the transitions. If you can set it up to where I can transition from a pistol, shotgun, to rifle, and getting a reasonable time. I mean, the time I always strive for, and again, target dependent, stage dependent, was a 2-second transition between all guns. As long as the targets, you know, they were reasonable time or reasonable distance and reasonable size. If I went from pistol to shotgun, it was 2 seconds. If I went from shotgun to pistol, it was 2 seconds. So you can work that in dry fire all day long. That's a huge one for three-gunners. But as far as breaking the individual guns down, you can do a lot with like rifle setups. You know, build yourself like a barricade prop and set a part time and put a target, you know, as far as you can in your house, wherever you dry fire, and work a setup into a reverse kneeling, a setup into a standing, that kind of stuff. And then just transitions between the targets. A lot of times I see guys like they're pulling the trigger all the time when they're on dry fire. A lot of it is just finding that trigger prep. That's the biggest thing I see with students is under prepping of the trigger with all guns, is finding that prep every time they transition. So I don't necessarily have to pull the trigger for that. So when I'm doing transitions, I'm always working trigger prep, and that seems to serve me well there. The other part you mentioned with newer shooters that have issues, and this is like I deal with the LE side a lot because of work. And I always tell our students there, like, you're never going to rise to the occasion. It's kind of the same thing here. If you can't do something in practice or you haven't practiced something a lot, when you come out to a match, there's not a life or death stress here, but there is an adrenaline rush. There is stress, and that's why a lot of us do this, right, because we enjoy it. But our skills deteriorate when we come out here. We're under pressure, right? So having that good base of fundamentals, when I come out here, that's going to help me out here. I'm not going to think so much about, all right, how am I going to do this transition, more so than concentrate on the stage itself. You know what I mean? And that's the thing I think a lot of guys lose. If you don't practice that stuff at home, you come out to a match, you're not just going to automatically rise to the occasion and perform at your best.
Right.
So
like you said, that transition becomes just something that you do.
It's
not something that you're concentrating on. It's not like, okay, I shoot these 3 targets, and then I'm going to switch my rifle to my support hand, put my hand on the grip of my pistol, you know, dump the rifle, pistol up, you know, that kind of thing. It's just that's what you do.
Yeah, it's subconscious. The conscious side of that is learning that in practice. You know what I mean?
Right.
It may take you walking yourself through it time and time again until you get all your index points, how you pick your gun up, and how you draw the holster. And then when you get to a match, I don't think about that, because if you think about that during shooting, it never goes well. Right? As soon as you start to think during shooting, it all goes downhill from there. So.
Yeah, that's true. Well, okay, so going back to what you were talking about at Superstition, then you said, you know, your first stage you weren't feeling the flow. You're like, this feels choppy. This doesn't feel good. Are you having that conscious thought as it's happening there, and then is that taking you out of the moment?
Sometimes it is. Sometimes, you know, or you get done and just you don't feel it, but. You know, it's just after running the stages over the years, when you get done a stage, usually when I get done a stage and I feel like I've forgotten targets, or my best stage, I'm like, wow, am I done? Did I get all these targets? Because that didn't feel like, you know, that was too fast.
Didn't feel like enough time.
Yeah, and then I get done and you know, it was a great run. But when I'm running a stage and I feel like, man, this is choppy and it's taking me longer to engage this array than what I planned on, and my movement's not right, then it's like, yeah, I need to go back and work some stage practice, you know.
Yeah.
I had a little bit of that yesterday here. We ended up we walked a stage 1,000,000 times, and I don't walk a stage at a full out run every time. I'll walk it, make sure I've got and I'm trying to visualize sight pictures on targets and what I should be seeing and all that. And yesterday, the stage, my movement carried me further than what I had anticipated, because it took me longer to engage the targets. And again, that's a practice issue. I know that.
Sure.
But when I got to the end, I just instinctively altered the plan and shot what was available, you know, and we got back. And Rick and I, we talked stage plan. He goes, hey, buddy, you changed that up. Why? And I said, well, I got there before I anticipated. That target was there. I came in on it and I shot that instead, you know. So I changed the plan up towards the end. That wasn't the goal, but again, the movement, it just wasn't. The movement and the shooting weren't adding up.
Right.
The speed was correct. The shooting wasn't. So, but yeah, and that's something I have to work on.
Yeah.
So.
Do you ever have the feeling when you're shooting of like, this is going really awesome,
and then it goes horrible right after that? Yep. And that is the hard part about being focused is as soon as you think things are going well, you have that conscious thought like, hey, this is going great, and all of a sudden it goes downhill. And the reason is because you're thinking. If you were working in the moment, that's subconscious, and you're just doing what you're supposed to, the fundamentals. You know, if you're seeing a sight picture, you're transitioning or whatever the case is, that's how you run a consistent stage. You know, you keep all that conscious thought out of there, and you just do what you've trained to do.
Right.
You'll be golden every time.
Right.
But that's not easy to do.
No, it's not. So I've seen you in a lot of shoot-offs, and we shot on squads together and stuff like that. Saw you shoot last night. It's very difficult to tell how you felt about a stage when you shoot it. You hardly exhibit any sort of emotion. You never do a fist pump in the air or let out a woo or anything like that. So is that something that's been part of your personality your entire life? Is that something you learn because you're a law enforcement officer? Is that something you learned in your career, or is that your practical shooting persona?
I think it's just been my entire life. I've always been kind of lower key with that stuff. I've kind of been more on the humble side of things. I don't go out and
even if something goes bad, you don't show any sort of emotion.
And I think I've learned that over the years, mainly from competition. You shoot a bad stage. I've shot enough matches where I've bombed some stages, and if you carry that over to the next stage, you could lose a match. I've bombed stages and ended up winning matches. And you think back, you're like, wow, if I would have carried that stage to you could bomb the first or second stage of your match. If you carry that through the rest, the outcome's not going to be what you want. It's over and done with, and to think you're going to come out here every single time, every single performance and be perfect, you're going to be sadly mistaken and let down, right?
For sure. I'm frequently let down.
and when you come out, if you have a bad stage, put it behind you. Yeah. It's done. It's over with. That's not the norm. You go back out and go to the next stage, and you just reset and work again. I find it, and even on the good side of things, like when you shoot a stage well, if you get so worked up about it, sometimes that can hurt you on the next stage. You know what I mean? You shoot a stage. All right, it's like me to shoot a stage like that. That's how I work in practice. Go to the next stage and just reattack and start from there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like a roller coaster covers a lot of linear feet, right? But it's not a lot of distance, So the ups and downs, that'll take you through that emotional roller coaster, right? But you'll go farther if you travel the same distance in a straight line.
Straight line. Man, that's consistency, and there's been a lot of times, and I won't say that I never push. But there's been a lot of times where I'm more of a consistent shooter. You'll see guys come out and just totally crush a stage. And the next stage, they're like 20th. And then they're back up to second. And then they're 20th. And you look at guys that shoot third place, fourth place, second place, first place throughout a match on a stage, and they usually end up placing way better.
Right.
So that's been my goal all along, is try and be consistent. Now, if you get down to the last stage or two and you happen to look at scores and you're like, wow, I need to push a little bit here. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Like last night, perfect example. I had a plan going up to the final five with all of us there. Dan gets up there and just lays it down, right?
He did.
So he came up with 31 points.
So now you got to come up with at least 31.
The plan I was going to shoot, if I executed properly, was 30 points.
Okay.
So I needed to shoot his plan and beat him at it. And I had to do that from the time I picked my rifle up and stepped into the box, because I was sitting there running my plan, because all along we were all running plans that 30 points, which is my max, could have won. And I was like, that's it, what we're doing. And then he ran that, and he got 31 points. And as I stepped into the box, I'm like, well, I have to replicate his plan and beat him by one target. Or time and hope that my tiebreaker was a little bit better.
Right.
And that changed automatically.
I think your tiebreaker was better.
Yeah, I was 22 and change. I think he was 24. So if I would have tied him, I would have been good. But the only way to tie him was to run his plan.
Right.
So that was one of those things.
That's a hard game to play, too.
Yeah. Yeah,
like
with guns that aren't yours.
Yeah, exactly. At night, under the lights.
Yeah. So, that was one of those things that the plan changed instantly, and it was something I had to do. So playing conservative there, I could have played conservative and ran my plan. If I would execute perfectly, I came up with 30. He still won. So in that type of shoot-off, what's the sense of playing conservative? You know what I mean? So it's like, we're going for the win. You might as well try and beat it.
Might as well.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, well, and you have to, because again, if like you said, if you execute your plan, you're still going to lose. Yeah. So you might
go
Might
for
as well,
it.
just, yeah.
So, and it didn't work out.
Nope.
You know?
Dan came out on top on that one.
Yep, he did.
Yep. Brian
So-
Nelson second, and then Kyle Soul third.
Yep.
On a tiebreaker with Nate Staskowitz.
Yep.
So yeah. Well, Greg, you're kind of known as a rifleman. You know, in any time I bring up like a Greg Jordan this, Greg Jordan that, someone always comments on like, oh, he's such a rifleman, right? And it's funny because I think like you don't get enough love for the pistol shooting because you're pretty good pistol shooter as well, but you're known for rifle shooting. When you approach a stage, rifle, pistol, shotgun, do you have like a strength that you like to lean toward?
I think that changes, Dave. It's changed throughout my career, and it changes throughout the season.
Okay.
When I started 3-gun, when I left USPSA, I ended up making GM in production, and I felt really good, and that transitioned over to 3-gun. Pistol was my strong point by far.
Sure.
If I could get to a pistol, that was like where I needed to be. And then as my skills developed with the other guns, that didn't lend me enough time to practice pistol. So I have lost skill in pistol from what I used to have. So now when I go back and forth, it depends on a lot of the target array. I still feel like rifle is a strong point for me. But between shotgun and pistol, that's kind of up in the air. It depends on where I'm at in the season and practice. I mean, some days I'm like, I really feel like I can shoot pistol well today, and the next day it's like, I better shoot some shotgun today. So, yeah, for me it changes. It changes throughout the year and, again, throughout my career. I know I've lost speed with pistol. I think a lot of the speed loss with pistol is maybe accuracy gain with 3-gun because USPSA and 3-gun are not the same game.
No.
Very rarely do you shoot 4x10s in USPSA and shoot 50-yard targets. It's all up close and fast. And I feel like when I left that game, I not left it, but hadn't shot it as much, my speed and my manipulations have went down. But I also feel like I've gained more discipline on the accuracy side. So, but yeah, I mean, they change. So.
Yeah, and that is another thing that's said about you frequently is that you generally don't break a trigger shot unless you're on target. I hate to pick on Brian Nelson, but he's such a great example of this. Is like he squirts a lot of bullets at stuff, and he does everything really fast. But he probably fires twice as many rounds as like I would or someone else. Where as people see you on the opposite end of the spectrum, there is conservative on shots or number of rounds spent, and hooking up and making those hits. Is that something conscious that you're doing, or are you just doing what we're supposed to, is aligning the sights and pressing the trigger?
For Brian, that works, and
Sure.
that's kind of goes back to like what Shane Coley and Keith and some of the guys used in the Pro Series. What they did there worked. For Brian, that works. He's got a fast trigger finger.
He does. Super.
And he makes up. The running joke is accuracy by volume. I'm going to put enough rounds in there, I'm going to hit the target. And he has good fundamentals. I mean, you're not going to just come out and spray and pray and do that. He has the fundamentals.
Right. He's just super fresh in my head because I'm shooting on squad with him.
Yeah.
So.
and when you see him shoot, you're like, wow, he shot a lot of bullets. But then you get done, it's like his time was fast because his splits were 13s and 14s.
Yeah.
For me, I build that in practice. I am not satisfied with runs where I throw a bunch of extra shots. My goal is to shoot. You're never going to be 100% clean because you're going to be too slow.
Right.
If you shoot 1 for 1 every single time, you're going to be too slow. You're always, or I should say, most guys are going to have a few extra shots here and there. But that's kind of the goal in practice, is to run as consistent as possible and drop as few shots as possible. And that's that balance. You know what I mean?
Right.
Trying to push the time, extra shots, or trying to slow down, and then your time suffers. So it's trying to find that balance.
Well, and a lot of people say, in your practice, you're supposed to try the hero things and then run conservative in a match, right? You push yourself in your practice, and so your match performance elevates. Do you do that? Do you run like with your hair on fire in practice?
A certain amount of time, because when you run that fast or you push that hard, you're going to miss.
Right.
And you don't want to practice missing more than you practice hitting.
Okay.
So I run, a lot of times I use par times if I'm running the stages like we talked about. If I set a par for 20 seconds for a stage, I run 20, run 19.5, run 21, so I'm pretty consistent. And then it's like, all right, it's a lightning round. It's time to push. Par time is going to be 18 now. And you run. And if you hook up, that allows your eyes and everything to focus on that faster speed. And that's the only way you truly get faster. But if you don't hook up, then you kind of like, okay, go back to the other. You know what I mean? And you're still seeing things at a faster pace. But I do believe you have to do that in practice. You just have to be careful with the ratio you throw that in.
Right.
How much. If that's your whole practice and you come out here, you're going to replicate that here. It's hard to turn that off when that's all you do.
Yeah. So then when you do hook up on like that hero run, do you then stop your practice right there? Like, I'm going to imprint that in my head. Do you take some time to think about it?
No.
Or do you just move on?
If I hook up on that, I'll run it again for consistency and see where it's at. If you hook up again, then my par time gets lowered.
Okay.
All right. So I'm not, because that's 100%. It's unrealistic to think you're going to come out here and run 100% over 10 stages or 8 stages and hook up every single time versus coming out here 90% and running that through. And like I said, that's what works for me. If I'm able to stay consistent, that's served me well. But again, that goes back to practice and the discipline you're putting on yourself in practice. You know what I mean? Everybody gets something different out of practice. Some guys just like to go shoot, and they don't really look at the whole, like, how you can get better and all that stuff. I'm just going to go shoot today because they like it. And that's cool. It's whatever works for you. But if you're really striving to get better, you have to find a system that works for you. How you're going to run as far as consistency and your times and all that stuff, and then that will all translate to a match. So,
well, okay, so let's discuss longevity in the game. So you've been around for quite a while in 3-gun. When was your first 3-gun match for reference point?
3-gun, I started in 2009.
Okay.
I went to Fort Benning in 2009.
All right, and then you shot USPSA for a couple of years before that?
Yep, 2007 I started in USPSA.
Okay.
And then I did a mix for about 2 years, and then I decided I couldn't do both and be as good as I wanted to be in both. So then that's when I kind of, set USPSA aside, and then we focused more on 3-gun.
Okay. So, in that time, you've grown as a person like we were talking about. Your career has changed. Life situations change. I'm not sure. You have one daughter, right?
And a son. Yep.
Oh, you have a son too.
Yep.
Okay, so
older son.
You've got 2 children that you're trying to deal with, be a good father for. When do you fit in like practice, and has that changed over the years as far as priorities go? It's
funny you say that, Dave, because a couple years ago, the way my work and my family situation worked out, my hours I was working, I could practice uninterrupted. I worked some later night hours and stuff like that. So once everybody was off to school, it was 5-6 days a week, uninterrupted. Didn't have to worry about stuff. It didn't affect the family life. It didn't affect work, and it was great. Since then, within the last year and a half, 2 years, work has changed. I have more responsibilities. I'm working different hours, and I see that the family time now is the same time the practice should be. So that becomes the balancing act. And I will say that the family life and some other things are winning out right now. I haven't practiced as much over the last 2 years as I had in the past. And I can see the difference in match performance. Usually now, especially this year, it seems like by about the 3rd stage is when I start to get warmed up. And it's a balancing act I think everybody has to go with. My job, everybody thinks, well, this guy's a cop, or, a lot of people I run into, like, well, you shoot, that's your job as a shooter. I don't. And honestly, at work, I shoot very little because I'm usually doing a lot of teaching or setting up training or stuff like that. So, my shooting has definitely curtailed off over the last 2 years as compared to what it was back a couple years ago.
Yeah. I associate with way more police officers than I ever have in my entire life now. And every single one I talk to complains about how much they shoot at work, how little, I guess. So when people are like, oh, you shoot all the time, it's like, no, I carry a gun all the time.
Yeah, there's a big difference.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but yeah, it's definitely a tough balancing act. And there are other things you want to do in your life too. I mean, it depends on where you want to go. I still strive to come out and win at 3-gun, but there's other things I like to do, outdoors and hiking and camping, and, I do jiu-jitsu and stuff like that. So trying to balance that, and I want to be good at all of it. You know what I mean? It's just my personality. And a lot of guys out here are the same way. They come out here, they don't want to be mediocre. They want to be good at all the stuff, you know what I mean? So it's like, well, how do you find time to do all that stuff? And it's just constantly busy. I'm constantly doing something. May not always be 3-gun, but it's constantly busy.
Yeah.
So.
Well, okay. So I was going to ask you about physical training as well. You mentioned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So first of all, we should get you in a grudge match with Josh Fralick. I think this would be kind of cool. Come on.
Nah, Josh is a little bit more advanced than me.
He's been out of the game for so long. You could take him. All right. So you do have other training that you do outside of just going to the range and shooting, right? You're a fit guy. So what does the training look like? And then do you aim your physical training specifically for 3-gun, or is it just to be a healthy human?
It's more so I'll say more job specific.
Okay.
More so than 3-gun. I guess they kind of match up a little bit. I don't like to do the same thing all the time. Like some guys are diehard CrossFit, and if that works for them, that's great. I do, endurance training, strength training, cardio, just trying to get a good overall balance and something that I'll stick with. A lot of times if I do something for too long, I kind of get bored with that. So I'm constantly doing something, whether, like I said, jiu-jitsu is a great physical training. I mean, it doesn't matter it seems like to me, it doesn't matter what you do outside of there until you go in and actually train. You're smoked and you're like, wow, I'm so far out of shape.
I understand grip strength is huge.
Yeah, grip strength is huge. I leave there, my fingers are torn up. They're like a mess. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I usually have pretty good grip strength from this. You know what I mean? I've trained that over the years.
Well, and then that grip strength from jiu-jitsu helps here too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. As long as you don't get hurt.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, I mean, it's just I like to mix it up. So like I said, training in the gym as far as jiu-jitsu, and then working, like I said, some strength training. I don't go heavy. Like when I was younger, I used to try and as much as I could do. I found that as I get older, it just hurts me more. So
I struggle with that too. It's like, well, I really want a 450-pound deadlift, so I can write that in on a whiteboard that someone's going to erase at 5:00 when I leave here.
Yeah.
For what?
For what? Yep. It's about functional strength and being functionally fit. And that's kind of what I look at is, am I fit overall? Cardio, endurance, and then reasonable strength. I know I'm not going to be out here bench pressing 500 pounds, but as long as I'm reasonably strong enough to do my job and be fit at that. So. But yeah, I don't know. I think they kind of carry over to 3-gun, but I don't say that I come out here and do a 3-gun specific training.
Okay.
So,
well, something you said there really kind of struck me. You said that you get bored doing the same thing over and over again, but we just talked about you've been shooting since 2007, right? Why are you sticking with the competitive shooting sports and 3-gun specifically? What is it about it that's created that sort of longevity of interest for you?
It's the drive to. Basically the drive to win, to come out here. I'm not going to lie to you, it gets harder every year. You come out here and the drive to come out and win. It's just something that either you have or you don't. You know what I mean? There's guys out here that just love to come out and shoot, and then that's it. And that's great. But there's also that few that come out here and they want to win. You know what I mean? And it doesn't matter what happens throughout the year, practice, no practice. You show up here on match day. I want to win. You know what I mean? And that's what keeps the drive going. And that's with everything I do. And that's just a personality trait. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad.
Sure.
My wife tells me that all the time. So,
it's probably bad for the kids when you're playing ping pong in the
hotel.
A little
too competitive, yeah. But that's just part of it. And like I said, I'm not the only one out here. That's what drives any competitor in any sport is that drive to win. And then you're going to do what it takes to come out here and make that happen.
Sure.
So,
well, we've talked about that frequently on the show, especially in the shoot-off format. Because there's fierce competition going on there. So is it that you love to win, or is it you hate to lose? And if not, do you see it like a distinction between those? Like what burns more?
The losing burns more.
Does it?
Yeah. I've been second place a lot, and that burns a lot. You know what I mean? It really motivates you to go out and train harder. And then, the guys at work are pretty relentless,
Oh, you didn't win?
So, yeah.
Dude, I took second. Come on.
You have to figure, like, when you're done the match, and then, like, you beat yourself up enough over what you could or should have done, and then you go to work the next week, and then the guys are pretty relentless.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so you hear that all over again. But, no, that's the thing is, a lot of these matches are decided by single shots.
Yeah.
2 shots, especially shoot-off format over the years.
Yeah.
I don't know how many matches I've lost by, like, 1 plate. And you think back, you're like, 1 plate. What could I have done different, to come up 1 plate ahead? And then you think back, you're like, wow, I could have, shot rifle faster or did this or been cleaner. So that's definitely the thing. A lot of these decisions are based on 1 or 2 shots, and that's what's hard. You work hard to get up to that match, and then you shoot it, and then it's like you're down 1 plate.
Right.
That stings.
Right.
So.
Can you find happiness in second place? Like, do you think like let me finish. Stop giggling. Do you ever think like, okay, there's 180 people in my division and I took second place. Like I smoked 178 fools and I lost to one guy.
The usual answer is no.
Yeah.
Over the years, there's been a couple times where I've been like, you know what? I haven't practiced at all. I haven't practiced this whole month. I expect to win when I come out, but realistically, probably not. If you have a guy that is legitimately training every day and doing this stuff every day, it's hard to beat that.
Right.
So I'm second. You try and come to terms with that, but for me, it's tough to tough to go that route. So
it is.
It's just it's something. You can't turn it off. You know what I mean? I've been like that since I was a kid. You know, just everything I've done, I've just wanted to win, and then second place usually doesn't work.
That's awesome. But, well, Greg, I want to turn this. We've only got a few minutes here before you need to get out and start walking stages. So I want to turn over to some questions that I opened up to the audience. Mm-hmm. First one is from Newcomb 3 Gun on Instagram. And so his question is, how do you stay motivated? And we kind of talked about longevity there, but on like a micro level, match coming up, how do you stay motivated?
Looking and preparing for that match. That's the biggest thing. This match was interesting because this is the first year I shot this match. Mm-hmm. I didn't know the flavor. I kind of guessed what the flavor was going to be, but each match has its own flavor. So like my next one coming up is Pro-Am. I've shot Pro-Am for a number of years. I know what it is. I know where I want to finish, and I know what I need to do to get prepared for that match. So that's the motivation. I keep it short-term versus long-term. Mm-hmm. So prepare for Pro-Am, have a good performance, and then after that, for this year, it's NRA. So I know what I need to do for NRA, and I work those skill sets, and that's my motivation is, all right, I want to do a good performance in NRA. And then I just work that throughout the year versus saying, well, at the end of the year, I want to be here, or I want to do this by the end of the year. I keep my goals more short term to get prepared for those upcoming matches.
Yeah. You know, that's like the marathon thing, like just to the next telephone pole, just to the next telephone pole. Yep. You know, you keep those increments instead of like, okay, only 25 more miles.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that's worked well for me too, because once you learn to flavor a match, and that's hard for a new shooter because they don't know, but once you get to learn some match directors and understand like how they put matches, they all have their own twist to things.
Sure.
You know, it's like, okay, well, Pro-Am's coming up. Mike's running Pro-Am. Mike Sexton loves to do.
Brian Corey's going to set up too, so you know him.
Yeah, so I know, hey, Mike likes to do, some options. He likes to do some long-range rifle. So I need to make sure my pistol and shotgun are spun up, as far as the, where the cutoff line is for options, that kind of thing. And then long-range rifle. Got to train long-range rifle the next week coming up because Mike's going to put some long-range targets out there. So that kind of helps you prepare for that. And it focuses your practice more on what you need to work on versus just, I need to work on everything.
Yeah.
Because
I suck at all the things.
Yeah, then when you go out there, it's like, wow, I should have really worked on long range.
Right.
So that kind of helps me stay motivated match to match versus a whole year.
Mm-hmm.
So
I got you. Okay, so same guy has 2 more questions here. Do you ever lose the drive to compete?
I won't say I ever lose the drive. I will say that work definitely gets in the way of things sometimes. With the added responsibility, everybody has it. Their job as you progress through your job, you get more and more responsibility. It definitely takes away from some of the drive to go out there and do it. It's something. I mean, you have to dig down deep sometimes. If practice isn't always something that you want to do. Yeah. But it's something that you have to do when you go out there. So, I mean, there are times where it's like, man, I really don't want to go out and practice today, but the match is in a week. Yeah. And I have to get out there and practice. So, it's definitely hard to maintain that. When I first started the sport, there was way less on the, the work side and stuff like that practice was it. That's what I did all the time. And now I think that's helped a lot with building a foundation. But now it's something that, I have to drag myself out there sometimes to do it. So, but it's worth it in the end.
So do you ever have like a practice session where you're like, I just do not want to be out here pulling the trigger?
Mm-hmm. There are times of that. There are times where, I've had to get up for work at 2 a.m. and I've been out all day at 6 o'clock in the afternoon and I know I need to practice. And, I'll go out sometimes to practice. Sometimes I won't. If I'm totally smoked, totally tired, sometimes you do more damage than actually good because a lot of this is a mental game. You know what I mean? Shooting, especially once you develop a good foundation, it's a mental game. And if you're smoked and you're tired and you've been stressed all day, to expect yourself to come out and perform, it's not realistic. And then when you come out and you don't perform well, the last thing you want to do is burn that in your brain like, wow, I suck today at pistol, and you leave the range. That's not your true performance level because very rarely do you go out and shoot a match on 3 hours of sleep and work in 14 hours. You know what I mean?
Yeah, today, though.
Today could be – I'm glad I wasn't shooting this morning.
Oh, my God, 5:30 came early today. Holy crap.
I bet it did. But, yeah, I mean, there are times where I've skipped practice because of that, but for the most part, it's what keeps me in check is the match-to-match preparation.
Mm-hmm. So. All right. So last one is a pretty quick one from Newcomb 3 Gun. How many rounds do you go through each year?
Well, this year is definitely down as opposed to the last couple of years, but my average is about anywhere from 15 to 20,000 pistol a year, and that's focus rounds, it's not just blazing, and then usually about 10,000 shotgun and about 15,000 rifle.
Okay,
that's kind of an average for me over the last couple of years. Like I said, this year is going to be down a little bit just because I haven't been able to get out as much, but and again, that's focus. So a lot of guys look at rounds as like I'd go out and pull the trigger that much. Those are focused rounds. I'm never going to go out there and just blast to say, well, I got my round count in for the day.
Yeah.
If I don't get the round count in for the day, that's fine. I'll do it another day. But definitely making sure that each one of those rounds counts.
Do you only shoot your 3-gun gear, or do you ever take like a Browning buckmark out there? And
yeah, I mean, there's times I take my kids out. We'll go. I think that.
Do you consider that training and practice as well?
No, that's just for fun, man.
Oh, is it?
It's just something different for fun. There are times I'll take like an open gun out there. Now, I will do that sometimes, especially early in the year. I've found for me, I shoot a lot of tac ops, so I don't have a dot on a gun.
Right.
But I find that by throwing a dot on a gun, my footwork seems to get a little better throughout the stages because it doesn't allow me. I don't have to focus so much on the sights and all that. It's one focal point, and my footwork gets a little smoother because the engagement's a little bit faster. So there are times where I'll do that, but for the most part, if I go out to plink around, we'll go shoot trap or do something like that. It's just for fun.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, throughout the year, probably 90% of the time is focused on 3-gun. I do shoot some precision matches. We shot Palmetto State this year.
Right.
So I was going to do some long gun stuff. I enjoy doing that, or long range stuff. I enjoy doing that. But yeah, for the most part, I just stick with this.
Okay.
So.
Well, take a look at your watch right there, and let me know if we have a couple more questions we can do here.
Yeah, we have a little bit more.
Okay. For folks listening, this is the morning session. Greg's going to be shooting afternoon here, so we're fitting this one in. All right, so training time versus reps. So this is an interesting one. Our buddy Jeremy Gresham gave me this one, and he and I have discussed it several times before in the context of practice and getting proper reps. Whereas, some, and let me give you a little bit of background, but some guys will, get into a position, fling 5 rounds, hit the target, and say, all right, good practice session, right? Whereas Jeremy has told me that you don't do that. It's perfect rep every time.
Yeah, I strive for that, and I strive a lot of time for the timer. The timer never lies. When you set a part time, it's going to be the same part time every time. I learned this back from shooting shoot-offs. I had a lot of buddies that come out, especially when I started getting ready for 3-Gun Nation. They would be like, hey, man, I'll come down and practice with you. I'll shoot off against you. And that was great because you could hear the noise on the other side.
Yeah,
but what I always
tuned to that.
What I always found was they feel pressure shooting against me, even in practice. Everybody wants to win, right? So they want I beat Greg in practice, So they feel like they're going to come out and they have that. So maybe their performance isn't up to par. And if I win there, is it because they didn't shoot as well or I shot better? But when I go out there and I do a shoot-off stage and I set it up and I say, all right, par time for this is 19. It's 19 every single time, which means I need to perform the same every single time. Not because the other guy had a few misses and I was able to squeak it out. I beat the timer every time. And that for me, that has developed more consistency than not. So I do strive for that, beating that timer, beating that par, the perfect reps. I found that as far as managing time versus reps, I look at anywhere from a 2 to 3 hour practice.
Okay.
If I find I go more than that, I start to struggle with staying in it mentally. Because you get tired. You know what I mean? When you're trying to perform at your best for 2 or 3 hours straight. And my practices, I don't spend a lot of time fooling around. I mean, I think Jeremy will tell you, we've been out a couple times, and it's like, all right, we're going to shoot this, and we go over here, and we run over there, and we top mags off, and we shoot this, and we set this up, and we shoot this. I don't sit around and think about things. I just keep working time. So in 2 or 3 hours, I can get a lot done, but you're also mentally drained at that point.
Right.
So to say you're going
to be narrowly focused for 2 hours.
Yeah, and a lot of times I practice by myself, so it's just me. If I get 3 or 4 dude, Rick and Jeremy and guys that come out and we practice, the session can go longer because I'm not shooting that whole time because those guys are going too. But yeah, that 2 to 3 hour window seemed to work best for me. So.
Do you try to beat them in practice? Do you have to win practice?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so I really like this next question. Over the last bunch of episodes, I've been asking people, where do you see the sport of 3-gun headed? The way, so Jeremy gave me a, add on to that. You've seen the sport grow. We saw 3-Gun Nation come in. We saw now we're on the sports on television. It's kind of like the taste that I got I don't know, what brought it to my attention as well, and several other people that are contemporaries of me when we started. It's no longer on television. A Three Gun Nation, the series is not nearly as big as it was in the last couple of years. So where do you see Three Gun as a whole going?
That's a tough question, Dave. I think a lot of it, and we've seen this over the years, since I've been in it, it's a politically based sport.
Yeah.
The sponsors, they go up and down based on the climate. If they're selling guns, it seems like our sport really thrives, and if they're not, the sport goes down. And that's understandable because, the marketing budgets get cut out at the beginning of the year, and it's based on what the sales are doing. We as shooters can help that. It's very tough, though, to sell guns to people that already have guns. There's a lot of competitors here. So that's where it's important to bring, like your shows, to bring the new people out to get them introduced to the sport. It's tough to tell right now, and that's one of the things that's been hard over the last, probably the last 3 or 4 years. A lot of guys are like, hey, man, I don't see you at matches. Are you not shooting this year? What's going on? It's like, well, I've been shooting, but there are so many matches now. And I think that drains the sponsors at a point, because if you could shoot a major match every weekend, that's a lot. That's a lot of drain on our sponsors, and it also spreads the shooters out as well. There's a lot of different things going on now. Back when I started, there was probably about 8 major matches a year, and everybody showed up at those major matches. So as far as where the sport's going now, I think a lot of that's going to depend on the support we can get. I think it's great that we have so many major matches, but I think it also spreads us thin. So we may see it at a point where we have to consolidate a little bit. We have to say, well, while it's great to have these, let's consolidate and see if we can get some more shooters together, fill these bigger matches up, and get us back to where kind of our roots where we started. I've been shooting more of the outlaw stuff. I enjoy that. So I think I don't know. I think it's just going to depend on how the political climate goes, I think, for the next couple of years, and then to see what the sponsors can do. We have a lot of great sponsors in this sport.
Especially, looking around at this match. I mean, we're sitting next to a giant Magpul tent over there.
It's crazy. I don't know how they do what they do over the course of a year. I mean, there's not too many sponsors that, matches pop up all the time. That's what's crazy. It's like, hey, next month I want to run a major match, and they call sponsors up, and they come through every time. So, I don't know how much longer that can continue. So, I think at a point we're going to have to come back and consolidate and maybe do 8 to 10 majors and just have guys. The club matches are always going to be there. That's always going to be there for guys. But 8 to 10 majors where we all come together. And that's cool in the competitor point, too, because this match is great. All the top guys are here. When you go to a match and you don't recognize any of the names, it's not that there aren't good shooters there, but you're like, man, well, where's everybody at? Well, they're off shooting 3 other majors that are happening that weekend. You know what I mean? So it's hard to measure up like where you're at, or how your performance is at that time. So
and if you want to figure out where you're at, like this match right here today is the way to do it. I mean, it wasn't like this last year for sure. There was a lot of great shooters last year, but it was not anywhere near the volume of talent that there is this year. It's absolutely incredible. I have not seen another match with this that is this stacked.
No,
this year.
and I think that's because of the way the sport has grown as far as the matches each year. Because this was like regular course of action when it was Three Gun Nation back in the day. I mean, it was every time we showed up, everybody was there, and that's what you expected. You know what I mean? It was like, well, there's a squad of 15 dudes there that every one of them can win the match. You know what I mean? At any point in time.
I mean, that's a great point. Like the first Three Gun Nation match I went to was just to watch because it was the Nationals of 2015 when I first started the podcast, and I didn't know that you could just go shoot Nationals. I thought you had to shoot like a regional or get a slot in or something like that. But yeah, I remember going there and thinking like, holy crap! Like this is stacked. Like there are a ton of amazing shooters there.
Yeah. Yep.
And new guys coming up all the time too.
All the time. Yeah, that's always what's crazy, man. When you see somebody, you're like, wow, I did really good on the stage. You look at practice score, the day after, and you're like, who is that dude? He just put 5 seconds on me. You know what I mean? And that's great. That means there's new guys coming up there. They're working hard. They're putting their time in, and that's how names change in a sport.
Yeah, for sure. One of the weirdest feelings, and I've only been doing the show for 3 years. I talk about like I've been doing it forever, but we've got 205 episodes or something like that. So there's a ton of content in between there, and it's like weekly. So it's been 3 years. So I've even run into people like, oh, we should get you on the show, kind of chatting them up a little bit, and they'll say, well, back when we met, I'm like, where was that? And I was like, 2016 at this match. It's like, holy shit, dude. Like, just random dude I ran into. And in 2 years' time, now they're, like, winning matches.
Yes.
And it's amazing, like, how people can make that that leap in this sport. That's what I really like about it, too.
I think a lot of that, though, is attributed to what you're doing. Guys like you that are putting together informational, content for guys, because I remember back when I started, the books were out there we talked about, to read. But unless you went to a specific training class or you really had a guy that was like kind of mentoring you along the way, there wasn't the information out there. Now, for a new guy coming in, they can sit here and listen to your 205 shows, and they can get a little bit from, from me, a little bit from Keith. They can get a little bit from guys along the way and be like, put all that stuff together. And as long as you have the drive, I mean, these guys that are all coming up quick, they all have that drive. They're all working hard. As long as you can put that together and have the drive, they're making it happen.
Yeah.
So,
well, thanks for that compliment. I really appreciate it. And that's why I started the show, is like I wanted that content, and I wanted to know all the secrets, and there was nowhere out there to find them, So, well, Greg, we should let you get going so you can go walk stages and shoot.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate you doing the show again. We got to make it not 200 episodes in between. Do this again soon, but
Deal.
Want to give you opportunity here to give one final thought or one piece of advice for the audience before we leave you.
Yeah, I would say go out there, shoot your game, and put your time in practice. Those are the biggest things I tell new shooters. You got to put your time in, and whatever works for you. Everybody, if you practice 1 day a week and you can get it to 2, you're going to be better. 3 to 4. Put your time in practice and shoot your game. It's so easy to come out here in a match and get twisted up by somebody else or hear somebody else talk. Shoot your game. Put your time in practice. It will definitely serve you well, and that's how you're going to progress.
I love it. Right on. Well, Greg, it's been great catching up, dude. I appreciate your time, and thanks for hanging in with me on the first episode there. I went back and listened to it. I felt bad for you, and I'm glad you stuck with it.
No worries, Dave. No worries. Again, thanks for what you do. Thanks for having me back, and we'll do it less than 200 episodes next time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Greg.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
Hey, before you take off, check out the show notes at 3gunshow.com/episode 219 for links to things that Greg and I discussed in the podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Armalite, the original. Armalite rifles put the AR in AR-15. The rifles themselves come with 1 8 twist barrels, match barrels, 18-inch or 13.5-inch with a 15-inch or 12.5-inch handguard, Timney trigger, Luth AR stock, adjustable gas system, tunable comp, a patented tunable comp. This thing's ready to go right out of the box for a 3-gun with no additional modifications other than putting on a nice optic. I myself use a Vortex Viper PST 1-6 when I'm shooting TAC Ops or their Spitfire when I'm shooting limited. Check them out at armalite.com. Quick reminder that if you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, subscribe in iTunes, Google Play, Podcast Addict, or wherever you get your podcast content, so you will always get the very latest. Thank you so much for downloading, listening, and subscribing to the show. I'm Dave Hartman, and I'll see you on the range.
If you are finished, unload, show clear.